Monday morning began like all the others for the past year for Robert Miles. He woke up at 5 a.m., took an ice-cold shower of exactly 7 minutes, put on one of his 20 identical navy blue suits, and left his penthouse apartment on Park Avenue without even glancing out the window at the city of New York beginning to stir below. For Robert, the world was made of numbers, spreadsheets, and quarterly results. Nothing else mattered. At 38, he had built TechGen from scratch, transforming a small software startup into a technological colossus valued at billions of dollars. His secret was never a mystery to anyone who worked with him. Robert didn't have a heart. He had a calculator in its place. When his driver pulled up in front of the 23-story mirrored building that housed TechGen's headquarters, Robert got out of the car without a word of thanks as usual. He crossed the marble lobby with firm steps, ignoring the nervous greetings of employees who moved out of his way, as if he carried an aura of ice. In his private elevator, he checked his emails for the 3rd time since leaving home. There was an important meeting scheduled for 9 a.m., the most important in recent months, in fact. A meeting that would change the lives of hundreds of people, though Robert didn't think of it that way. To him, it was just another strategic decision necessary to keep the company competitive. When he entered his office on the 23rd floor, Francis, his secretary of 5 years, was already there with a cup of black coffee. No sugar, exactly as he liked it. Francis was a 40-year-old woman, efficient and discreet, who had learned from day one that Robert disliked unnecessary conversation. She placed the coffee on the glass desk and handed him a black folder. "Meeting confirmed for 9 o'clock, Mr. Miles. All directors have confirmed their attendance. The documents are ready for your signature," Francis said in her professional voice. Robert took the folder without looking at her. "Excellent. I want everyone there at 9 sharp. Not a minute late." "Yes, sir." Francis left the office silently, closing the door with care. Robert opened the folder and examined the documents for the 10th time. There were the names, 347 names, 347 employees who would be laid off that morning. Most of them worked in support, cleaning and maintenance. Outsourceable, Robert thought. The company would save $4.2 million a year with this measure. The numbers didn't lie. It was the correct decision from a financial standpoint. The fact that each of those names represented a person with a family, bills to pay, and dreams never crossed Robert's mind. Or if it did, he dismissed it with the same ease he dismissed everything that wasn't profit. At 9 o'clock on the dot, Robert walked into the boardroom on the 22nd floor. 6 directors were already seated around the mahogany table. Among them was Michael Carter, his partner and CFO, a 50-year-old man with graying hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. Michael had been instrumental in the company's early years, but lately the two had been diverging on some issues. Nothing serious enough to affect the business, but there was a growing tension between them. "Good morning, gentlemen," Robert said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Let's get straight to the point. You've all read the reports. Our profit margin dropped 2.8% last quarter. That is unacceptable. Our competitors are cutting costs, and we need to do the same if we want to maintain our leadership position." One of the directors, Frederick, the youngest of the group, dared to raise his hand timidly. "Mr. Miles, some of these employees have been with us for over 5 years. Perhaps we could consider internal reassignments before resorting to mass layoffs." Robert looked at Frederick with that icy expression that made even the bravest retreat. "Reassignments cost time and money in training. Time and money we don't have. Besides, these roles can be easily outsourced for 1/3 of the current cost. It's simple. Math, Frederick. You do understand math, don't you?" Frederick swallowed hard and nodded, looking back down at his papers. No one else dared to question. Robert opened the folder and began passing the documents for signature. Each director signed where indicated, authorizing the dismissals in their respective departments. When it was Michael's turn, he hesitated for a fraction of a second before signing. "Is there a problem, Michael?" Robert asked, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "No problem, Robert. It's just that this is the largest round of layoffs we've ever done. We'll need to manage the communication well to avoid problems with the press." Robert gave a humorless smile. "The press will forget about this in a week, and if they don't, Our profits next quarter will make them change the subject. Trust me." The meeting was over in less than 20 minutes. The documents were signed. The layoffs would begin to be communicated the next day. Robert returned to his office, feeling the cold satisfaction of someone who had completed another necessary task. He wasn't cruel for pleasure. He simply didn't see people as people. He saw numbers, costs, assets, and liabilities. His ability to shut off any empathy was what had made him so successful. Or at least that's what he told himself. The rest of the day proceeded normally. Meetings, calls, report analyses. Robert barely left his chair, except to go to the restroom. He didn't eat lunch, just asked Francis to bring him a protein bar and a green juice. Food was fuel, nothing more. At 6 in the evening, when most of the employees had already gone home, Robert was still in his office, reviewing financial projections for the next year. It was then that he heard a timid knock on the door. "Come in," he said, without taking his eyes off the computer screen. The door opened and Francis appeared, but there was something different in her expression. She looked uncomfortable, almost nervous. "Mr. Miles, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a situation on the 15th floor that needs your attention." Robert finally looked at her, annoyed. "What kind of situation? Isn't that what we have floor managers for?" "I know, sir, but it's about a cleaning staff member. She brought her daughter to work, and the girl is causing a bit of a disturbance. The HR manager tried to handle it, but the situation got complicated. The employee says she has no one to leave the child with and that if she's sent home now, she'll lose the day's pay and can't afford that." Robert clenched his teeth. "And why is this my problem, Francis? We have clear policies about children in the workplace." "I know, sir, but the girl started crying very loudly, and it's disrupting an important presentation for Japanese clients on the 15th floor. The manager thought that perhaps you could authorize an exception just for today to avoid a bigger incident." Robert took a deep breath, feeling his irritation grow. This was exactly the kind of distraction he hated. Human problems. Problems that couldn't be solved with a spreadsheet. But he also knew that a ruined presentation to the Japanese could cost them a multi-million-dollar contract. He closed his laptop with more force than necessary. "I'll handle this personally," he said, standing up, "and I want that employee's name. We're going to have a talk about professionalism." Francis swallowed. "Yes, sir. Her name is Lucy Sanders." Robert had no way of knowing as he followed Francis to the elevator that this name was about to change his life forever, that the crying girl on the 15th floor was a small time bomb about to detonate all his certainties, that in a few hours the 347 layoffs he had signed off on that morning would come back to haunt him in a way he could never have imagined. All Robert knew as the elevator descended was that he was annoyed at having to personally deal with something as trivial as a misplaced child. He had no idea he was about to meet the one person capable of tearing down all his defenses, a 6-year-old girl with big eyes and an honesty that would cut through his icy heart like a hot knife through butter. When the elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, Robert could immediately hear the shrill cry of a child echoing down the hallway. His jaw tightened. He hated noise, he hated disorder, and he definitely hated having to come down personally to solve something any average manager should be able to handle. Francis led him down the hall to the waiting area near the conference room where the presentation for the Japanese clients was taking place. There, sitting in a blue plastic chair, was a girl of about 6 with messy braids and a faded pink dress. She was crying her eyes out, her face red and wet with tears. Beside her, kneeling on the floor, was a woman in her early 30s, far too thin, with deep-set dark circles and a green cleaning uniform that seemed too large for her frail body. The woman was trying in vain to calm the girl, whispering words of comfort while casting desperate glances at the HR manager standing nearby, a short man named Paul who looked on the verge of a nervous breakdown. When Paul saw Robert approaching, his face turned even paler. "Mr. Miles, I am so sorry to have to bother you with this," Paul began, stumbling over his words. "I tried to resolve it, but the situation got out of my control, and the Japanese are complaining about the noise, and I just didn't know what else to do." Robert didn't even look at Paul. His eyes were fixed on the woman kneeling beside the child. "Are you Lucy Sanders?" he asked, his voice as sharp as ever. Lucy stood up quickly, nearly tripping over her own feet. Her eyes were red and her hands were trembling. "Yes, sir, I am. Please, Mr. Miles, I can explain." "Then explain," Robert said, crossing his arms, "and make it quick, because you're disrupting an important meeting." Lucy swallowed hard, casting a worried glance at her daughter, who continued to sob. "Sir, I know I shouldn't have brought Isabella to work. I know it's against the rules. But this morning the woman who watches her called me and said she was sick and couldn't take her. I tried calling my sister, my neighbor, everyone I know, but no one could. And I can't miss work, sir. I can't afford it. I promise this won't happen again. Please, just for today. She'll be quiet, I swear." Lucy's voice was filled with desperation, and Robert could see the real panic in her eyes. It was the kind of situation he would normally resolve with one sentence: rules are meant to be followed. Find another job if you can't comply. But there was something in the way this woman looked at him, as if her life depended on this decision, that made him hesitate for a fraction of a second, and it was in that fraction of a second that the girl Isabella stopped crying and looked directly at him. Her eyes were large and brown, still glistening with tears. She sniffled, wiped her nose on the back of her hand, and tilted her little head to the side, studying Robert with a childlike curiosity that caught him completely off guard. "Are you the boss?" she asked, with the brutal sincerity that only children possess. Robert blinked, taken aback. "Yes, I own the company." Isabella nodded slowly, as if that made all the sense in the world. "Then you're very important." Mommy said you're the most important person of all." Robert glanced at Lucy, who was mortified, trying to silence her daughter with desperate gestures. But Isabella completely ignored her mother and continued speaking, because that's what children did. They spoke the truth without filters, without fear, without calculating consequences. "I didn't want to cry, you know," Isabella continued, her voice still shaky but calmer now. "It's just that I got scared when that man over there said Mommy was going to lose her job. And Mommy can't lose her job because she needs to buy her medicine." Robert felt a strange twinge in his chest, a pang, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "What medicine?" he asked, and immediately regretted it because it was none of his business, and he shouldn't be prolonging this conversation. Isabella looked at her mother, as if asking for permission to continue. Lucy closed her eyes, humiliated, but said nothing. The girl interpreted the silence as consent. "Mommy's medicine. She's sick. She gets really tired and sometimes she gets dizzy. The doctor said she needs to take some pills, but they're very expensive." "Isabella, that's enough," Lucy finally interrupted, her voice thin and broken. "Mr. Miles doesn't want to hear about this." But there were tears in Lucy's eyes now, tears she was desperately trying to hold back. Robert stood there, not knowing exactly what to do. This was uncharted territory for him. Emotions, vulnerability, problems that couldn't be solved with an Excel spreadsheet. He should just send them both away and be done with it. That's what the old Robert would do without flinching. But for some reason, he couldn't understand. The words wouldn't come out. Isabella took a step toward him, and Robert had an instinctive urge to step back, but he forced himself to stay put. The girl was so close now that he could see the freckles on her small nose. She reached out her little hand and, before he could react, took his hand. Her hand was so small, so warm, so trusting. "My teacher said that good people help other good people," Isabella said, looking up at him with those immense eyes full of innocent hope. "And Mommy is very good. She works really hard and never complains, and she always makes me smile even when she's sad. So can't you, since you're so important, help her just a little bit?" The hallway fell into absolute silence. Francis, Paul, even Lucy seemed to be holding their breath. Robert looked down at the small, warm hand holding his, at this child who was looking at him with such pure, absolute faith that something inside him began to crack. It was as if a ray of light had found a fissure in a concrete wall and was beginning to widen it, slowly but relentlessly. "I need to get back to work," Robert murmured, his voice coming out strange, almost hoarse. He gently pulled his hand away and looked at Paul. "She can stay today, but find an empty room downstairs where the child can stay until the end of the shift, and I want someone to keep an eye on her to make sure she doesn't wander off." "Yes, sir," Paul said immediately. visibly relieved. Lucy let out a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "Thank you so much, Mr. Miles. Thank you so much. I promise this will never happen again." Robert gave a stiff nod and started to turn back toward the elevator, but Isabella's voice stopped him one more time. "Thank you. Mr. Boss, I knew you were good." Robert didn't answer. He didn't look back, he just kept walking. But as the elevator ascended back to the 23rd floor, he couldn't shake the feeling of that little hand in his, the way Isabella had said those words with such certainty. "I knew you were good," as if it were a fact, as if she could see something in him that he himself hadn't seen in years, perhaps had never seen. Back in his office, Robert tried to return to his work, but found he couldn't concentrate. His eyes kept returning to the black folder on his desk, the folder with the 347 names, 347 people he had fired without a second thought, without losing a moment's sleep. People who probably had children too, had bills to pay too, had health problems or expensive medicines or dreams that were about to be shattered. For the first time in a long time, Robert Miles felt something he no longer knew how to name. It wasn't guilt, not yet. It wasn't regret. It was just a small crack in the armor he had built around himself. A crack that was about to turn into a chasm. Robert didn't sleep well that night. It was a rare occurrence for him, as he usually passed out the moment his head hit the pillow, exhausted from another intense work day. But this time, he lay awake late into the night, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse apartment, listening to the heavy silence of the New York City dawn. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl, about the way she had held his hand, the absolute confidence in her voice when she said she knew he was good. No one had called him good in years. Efficient, yes, intelligent, certainly, ruthless, always. But good? The word seemed to belong to a different dictionary than the one that described Robert Miles. And there was something else bothering him. The expensive medicine, the sick mother. Lucy was clearly ill, working through it because she had no choice. How many other people in his company were in the same situation? How many were dragging themselves to work every day, sick, desperate, because one missed day meant not being able to pay the bills at the end of the month? These were questions Robert had never asked himself before, had never wanted to ask, but now they were there, hammering in his head, refusing to go away. The next morning, Robert arrived at the office earlier than usual. At 7 a.m., when Frances arrived, he was already in his office, a cup of cold coffee on his desk and his computer on. Frances seemed surprised to see him there so early, but she didn't comment. She simply made a fresh pot of coffee and placed a cup on his desk, as she always did. "Frances," Robert said without taking his eyes from the screen, "I need you to pull some files for me. Employee information." Frances took out her tablet, ready to take notes. "Of course, Mr. Miles. Which employees specifically?" Robert hesitated for a moment, as if considering backing down. But then the words came out. "Lucy Sanders, the cleaning staff member who was here yesterday with her daughter. I want to see her complete file, time with the company, performance reviews, everything." If Frances was surprised by the request, she didn't show it. She just nodded. "I'll get it for you immediately, sir." 20 minutes later, Frances returned with a folder. She placed it on Robert's desk carefully, as if handling something delicate. "Here is the information you requested. Lucy Sanders, 32 years old, worked at TechGen for 5 years as a full-time employee in the cleaning department. Her performance reviews are all excellent. Never had a warning, never missed a day without justification. She was named Employee of the Year by her direct supervisor for 4 consecutive years." Robert opened the folder and began to read. Each page confirmed what Frances had said. Lucy was a model employee, punctual, dedicated, efficient. There were even a few letters of commendation from managers in other departments commenting on the quality of her work. Robert turned a few more pages and then stopped. His blood ran cold. There, on a sheet dated 3 weeks ago, was her termination letter, signed by him, Robert Miles. His own signature was there, cold and impersonal, sealing the woman's fate. "She was fired," Robert muttered, more to himself than to Frances. "Yes, sir, in last month's round of layoffs. She was among the 347 employees who were let go." And now she's working here again. How? Frances consulted her tablet. She was rehired as a contractor, a week after her termination, by the company Total Clean, which took over the cleaning contract for TechGen after the layoffs. Her salary as a contractor is 40% lower than it was as a full-time employee, and she no longer has the benefits she had before, including the corporate health plan. Robert felt as if someone had just punched him in the stomach. When did she lose the health plan? Immediately upon termination. The plan had coverage until the end of the following month, so she lost full coverage 2 weeks ago. The pieces began to fall into place, in Robert's mind like a macabre puzzle. 2 weeks ago, exactly when Isabella said her mother needed expensive medicine. It wasn't a coincidence. It was cause and effect. He had fired Lucy. She had lost her health insurance, and now she couldn't afford the treatment she needed. Robert's hand trembled slightly as he held the papers. "Frances," he said slowly, "I need you to find out one more thing for me. Look in the old medical records from when she still had the plan. I want to know if she had any tests or appointments in her last few months." As a full-time employee, Frances left and returned half an hour later. Her face was serious. "Mr. Miles, I found something. Lucy had a battery of tests 3 months ago. She was referred to a hematologist because her routine exams showed concerning abnormalities. There's a medical report here. She was diagnosed with severe anemia that requires ongoing treatment and specific medication. The doctor recommended monthly follow-ups and, in some cases, intravenous supplementation. The full treatment is covered by our premium health plan, but without it, it would be very expensive indeed." Robert closed his eyes. He could see the timeline perfectly now. Lucy found out she was sick. She started treatment. And then he, Robert Miles, signed her termination letter without even looking at her name, without knowing he was taking from her the very thing she needed most at the worst possible time. He hadn't just fired an employee. He had sentenced a sick woman to choose between working or getting treated, between feeding her daughter or buying medicine, between surviving and living. "Thank you, Frances," Robert managed to say, his voice strangely hoarse. "You can go." "Mr. Miles," Frances began hesitantly, "if you're thinking of doing something about this, I can help prepare the documents." Robert looked at her, for the first time that morning truly seeing his secretary. Frances had been there for 5 years, witnessing all his cold decisions, all the emotionless layoffs, all the times he chose numbers over people. And yet, there was something in her eyes now that looked hopeful, as if she had been waiting for him to finally do the right thing. "I'll think about it," Robert said, but they both knew he was lying. He had already decided. He just didn't know yet exactly what he was going to do. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Robert tried to work, tried to focus on his scheduled meetings, but his mind was elsewhere. It was in the cleaning closet on the 14th floor, where Lucy was probably at that moment, mopping the floor, pretending not to be tired, pretending not to be sick, because she had no other choice. He was thinking of Isabella, that little 6-year-old girl who had looked at him and seen goodness where there was none, who had trusted him to save her mother because he was important, and important people could do incredible things. Around 5 in the afternoon, Robert couldn't take it anymore. He took the elevator down to the 14th floor. He found Lucy cleaning the restrooms, a weary expression on her face. When she saw him, she almost dropped the mop in shock. "Mr. Miles," she said quickly, straightening up, "is something wrong?" "I need to speak with you," Robert said, "in private." Lucy looked around nervously, clearly wondering if she was in trouble. Robert led her to an empty meeting room and closed the door. They stood there a few feet apart, a billionaire CEO in his $3,000 suit, and a cleaning lady in her faded green uniform. 2 worlds that should never have touched, but were now colliding inevitably. "I know you're sick," Robert said bluntly. "I know about the severe anemia. I know about the expensive medicine. And I know you lost your health insurance when you were fired." Lucy turned pale. "Sir, I can explain. I don't let it affect my work. I take the medicine I can afford, and I do the best I can." "Do you know who signed your termination letter?" Robert asked, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. Lucy blinked, confused. "No, sir, I assume it was HR." "It was me, Robert Miles. I personally signed your termination letter 3 weeks after you found out you were sick and needed treatment that only our health plan fully covered." The silence that followed was deafening. Lucy looked at him with those tired eyes, processing the information. Robert expected to see anger, resentment, accusation, but what he saw was something much worse. Acceptance. Resignation. As if she wasn't even surprised. As if this were just another one of life's normal cruelties. "I understand, sir," she said finally. "It's business. I don't blame you." And that was what broke Robert completely. Not the illness, not the expensive medicine, but that quiet acceptance of a brutal injustice, that silent dignity of someone who was used to being crushed by the system and no longer expected anything different. For the first time in his adult life, Robert Miles felt ashamed of himself. Robert spent the entire night awake again, but this time it wasn't because he was restless. It was because he was working. For the first time in years, he was working on something that had nothing to do with profits or stocks or market share. He was working on a way to fix what he had broken, or at least to try. At 3 in the morning, when he finally closed his laptop, he had a plan. It wasn't perfect. It would probably cause problems. It would definitely make Michael and the other directors question his sanity. But it was the right thing to do, and Robert discovered that this now mattered to him in a way it never had before. The next morning, he arrived at the office at 7 sharp and asked Francis to call an urgent meeting with the legal team and human resources departments. When everyone was gathered in his office, Robert presented his plan. He wanted to reinstate Lucy Sanders as a full-time employee immediately. Not only that, he wanted to increase her salary by 20% over what she earned before the layoff and give her the best health plan the company offered, with full coverage for her treatment. The HR director, Carla, a 50-year-old woman with 25 years of experience in people management, looked at him as if he had grown a second head. "Mr. Miles, with all due respect, this would set a dangerous precedent. We just laid off 347 employees. If we start rehiring people, and with a pay raise no less, we're going to have a flood of lawsuits and complaints." "Then let them come," Robert said with a firmness that surprised even himself. "This employee has 5 years of excellent performance. She was fired at the worst possible time and is working while sick because we don't have the decency to ensure our employees have basic health care. That ends today." "But sir," the corporate lawyer tried to argue, "this will cost the company not only her salary, but it will also create expectations. I don't care about expectations. I care about doing what's right, prepare the documents. I want this resolved by the end of the day." The meeting ended with everyone clearly in shock, but no one dared to argue further. When he was alone again, Robert picked up the phone and called Francis. "Find Lucy Sanders and ask her to come to my office at 3 p.m. Tell her it's nothing bad, that I just need to talk to her about an opportunity." At 3 o'clock sharp, Lucy knocked on the door to Robert's office. She entered nervously, wringing her hands, clearly bracing for bad news. Robert invited her to sit, but she politely declined, saying she'd rather stand because her uniform was dirty from work. Robert felt a pang of something akin to pain, seeing how she thought she didn't even deserve to sit in a clean chair. "Lucy," Robert began, trying to find the right words, "yesterday I told you that I was the one who signed your termination letter, and that's true, but what I didn't say is that it was one of the most cowardly decisions I have ever made in my life." Lucy blinked, confused. "Sir? I fired you without even knowing your name, without knowing you had a daughter, without knowing you were sick. I saw only a number on a spreadsheet and decided that number was disposable. And I was wrong. Deeply, inexcusably wrong." "Mr. Miles, you don't have to apologize," Lucy said quickly. "I know companies need to cut costs. I understand." "No, you don't understand," Robert interrupted, his voice firmer. "And I don't want you to understand. I don't want you or anyone else to think it's normal to be treated like a disposable number. You worked here for 5 years. You were an exemplary employee. And when you needed support the most, I took everything from you. That isn't normal. That's cruelty." Lucy was silent, tears beginning to well in her eyes. Robert opened a drawer and took out an envelope. Inside were the documents prepared by the legal department. He handed them to Lucy. "As of today, you are reinstated as a full-time employee of TechGen. Your salary will be 20% higher than it was before. You will have the best health plan we offer, with full coverage for your treatment. And if you need time off for appointments or tests, you will have it without any deduction from your salary." Lucy took the papers with trembling hands. She looked at them, but Robert doubted she was actually reading. Tears were now streaming freely down her face. "Mr. Miles," she whispered, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just accept and take care of your health. Isabella needs her mother to be well and strong." At the mention of her daughter's name, Lucy sobbed. "She was the reason for all of this, wasn't she? My Bella. She asked you to help. Me?" Robert nodded, feeling a lump in his own throat. "She said she knew I was good, and I realized I didn't want to prove her wrong." Lucy stepped forward, and before Robert could react, she hugged him. It was a quick, almost desperate hug of pure gratitude. When she pulled away, she was smiling through her tears. "Thank you, Mr. Miles. Thank you for giving me my life back." After Lucy left, Robert stood alone in his office, looking out the window at the city below. He felt good in a way he hadn't in years, but that feeling didn't last long. Because at 4:30, Michael Carter stormed into his office without knocking, his face red with anger. "Have you gone completely insane?" Michael shouted, throwing a folder onto Robert's desk. "You just reinstated an employee who was fired 3 weeks ago with a pay raise, the day after a massive round of cuts? Do you have any idea what message that sends?" Robert turned from the window and faced his partner. "It sends the message that we recognize when we've made a mistake and are willing to correct it." "A mistake?" Michael laughed humorlessly. "Those layoffs saved us. $4.2 million a year, Robert. $4.2 million. And now you want to throw it all away for one cleaning lady? She has a name. Lucy Sanders. And it's not because of her. It's because of me. It's because I finally realized that building an empire on the suffering of good people isn't success. It's just cruelty disguised as efficiency." Michael stared at him as if Robert were a stranger. "Who are you, and what have you done with the Robert Miles I know?" "Maybe the Robert Miles you knew was never who he was supposed to be," Robert answered calmly. The argument lasted for over an hour. Michael presented numbers, projections, warnings about the reaction from other shareholders. Robert listened patiently, but didn't change his mind. When Michael finally left, slamming the door, Robert knew this was far from over. He had stirred up a hornet's nest, and the consequences were just beginning. The next day, the news of Lucy's reinstatement spread through the company like wildfire. Employees whispered in the hallways, speculating about what it meant. The laid-off workers started calling HR, wanting to know if they would be called back too. The shareholders began sending worried emails, and Michael began to organize a formal opposition. But Robert didn't back down. In fact, he went further. He called a meeting with all the directors and announced his decision to create a medical assistance fund for employees who needed treatments not covered by the standard plan. He also announced that he was personally reviewing all the layoff cases to identify other unjust situations that needed to be corrected. "You are sabotaging your own company," Michael said coldly at the end of the meeting. "No," Robert replied, "I'm saving it, just in a way you can't see yet." That evening, as he was leaving the office, Robert found Isabella and Lucy waiting for him in the lobby. Isabella was holding a folded piece of paper. When she saw Robert, she ran to him with a huge smile on her face. "I made a drawing for you," she said, holding out the paper. Robert opened the drawing. It was a stick figure depiction of him, recognizable by the suit, holding the hands of 2 smaller stick figures, Lucy and Isabella. Above them, written in crooked, colorful letters, was the sentence, "Thank you for being really good." Robert looked at the simple drawing and felt something he hadn't felt since he was a child, tears threatening to fall. He swallowed hard and carefully folded the paper, placing it in the inside pocket of his jacket, right next to his heart. "This one is staying with me forever," he said, his voice strangely choked up. Isabella smiled even wider, and Lucy placed a hand on Robert's shoulder in a gesture of silent gratitude. As he watched them walk away, mother and daughter hand in hand, Robert knew there was no turning back. He had chosen his path and would now have to face all the consequences, no matter how difficult they were. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Robert began to implement changes that would give any traditional investor nightmares. First came a general wage increase for all employees in the base sectors: cleaning, security, maintenance. Then he announced the creation of a medical emergency fund that would cover special treatments for any employee in need. But the most radical change came when he convened a meeting and presented the project for the TechGen Wellness Center, a space on the ground floor of the building that would include free daycare for employees' children, a small gym, a relaxation room, and even a medical office with free basic care. When Michael saw the projected numbers for all these programs, he nearly had a breakdown. "A 300% increase in operational costs, Robert," he said, throwing the reports on the boardroom table. 300%. Our last quarter's profit has been completely wiped out. The shareholders are furious. I'm getting calls every hour from people wanting your head. "Let them," Robert answered calmly. "Show them the other numbers. Employee turnover is down 80%. Sick leave has decreased by 60%. Productivity is up 40%. Our engineers are filing twice as many patents because they're not stressed about whether they'll have a job next month." Those are long-term numbers, Robert. The shareholders want profit now. They don't care about productivity 5 years from now if the company goes bankrupt before then. The company won't go bankrupt. Trust me. But Michael didn't trust him, and he wasn't alone. The hallways of TechGen had turned into invisible battlefields where whispers and glances carried more weight than words. The high-level executives murmured in the elevators about the instability Robert was causing. Some were already updating their resumes, preparing for what they saw as the company's inevitable collapse. Others, however, especially the younger ones, watched the changes with a mixture of hope and admiration, as if they were finally seeing something they could believe in. A week later, Robert received an official notice. The shareholders were calling an extraordinary general meeting to vote on his continuation as CEO. They wanted to oust him from the company he had founded. The news spread quickly through TechGen. The employees were divided. The older executives, accustomed to the old Robert, thought he was having some sort of existential crisis, and that it would be better for everyone if he left and let someone more rational take over. But the employees in the base sectors, those who were directly benefiting from the changes, began to mobilize. Lucy, who had been promoted to supervisor of her department after showing exceptional results in just a few months, was one of those who took the lead. She organized discreet meetings with representatives from all departments. She talked to staff from cleaning, security, the cafeteria, maintenance, all the people Robert had forgotten existed before Isabella reminded him of his humanity. In her, words was a contagious passion, a conviction that they needed to fight for this man who had fought for them when no one else would. During these clandestine meetings, stories emerged. John, from the security department, told how he was finally able to pay for his father's knee surgery, thanks to the medical fund. Marianne, from maintenance, revealed that for the first time in 5 years, she was able to spend quality time with her children because she now had more flexible hours and didn't have to work 3 shifts to survive. Charles, from the cafeteria, admitted he was thinking of giving up on everything before the changes, physically and emotionally exhausted, but now he felt he had a purpose again. Each story was a brick in the construction of something bigger, a wall of gratitude and loyalty being built around Robert. Meanwhile, Robert faced pressure from all sides. Michael had allied himself with the main shareholders and was orchestrating his exit. They had the numbers on their side. The costs had indeed skyrocketed. The quarterly profit had plummeted. In a purely short-term financial analysis, Robert was destroying the company. During meetings with the directors, the atmosphere was tense and frigid. Frederick, the youngest director who had dared to question the original layoffs, now found himself torn between admiration for what Robert was doing and fear that the company really wouldn't survive the radical changes. On a particularly difficult afternoon, after an especially brutal meeting where 3 directors resigned, claiming they couldn't continue working in a company with no clear direction, Robert found himself alone in his office, looking out at the New York skyline. For the first time since making his decision, he allowed himself to question whether he had done the right thing. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe he was being irresponsible, putting his personal convictions above the well-being of the company he had built from scratch. Maybe it was better to go back, reverse some changes, find a middle ground. It was in that moment of doubt that Francis entered his office with some mail. It was a simple envelope with no official return address. Inside was a handwritten letter from a cleaning staff member on the night shift, someone Robert didn't even know existed. The letter was short, but devastating in its sincerity. She wrote about how she had been thinking of giving up on life, after discovering her son had a condition that required expensive treatment, how the company's new health plan had covered everything, how she now had hope again. It ended with a simple sentence: "Thank you for reminding me that there are still good people in this world." Robert read that letter 3 times, and each time the words weighed more heavily. He put the letter in the same drawer where he kept Isabella's drawing and knew he couldn't turn back, no matter how hard it was. But then something unexpected happened. A major business magazine, Business Weekly, contacted him for an interview. They had heard rumors about the radical changes at TechGen and wanted to know more. Michael strongly advised against the interview, arguing that any publicity at that moment would be disastrous. He predicted the article would be a public execution, exposing Robert's alleged management failures for the whole country to see. But Robert accepted anyway. If he was going to be thrown out of his own company, at least he wanted the world to know why. He wanted people to understand that he had tried to do something different, something better, even if he failed. The interview took place on a Thursday afternoon at the TechGen headquarters. The journalist, a man named Robert Allen, a veteran in the business world with over 20 years of experience covering the financial market, arrived with a team of photographers and camera operators. He had a reputation for being tough but fair, for not being afraid to ask the hard questions, but also for genuinely listening to the answers. Robert took him on a tour of the company before the formal interview. He showed him the wellness center that was almost finished, with its colorful walls and new equipment still smelling of fresh paint. He introduced Robert Allen to Lucy and a few other employees who had benefited from the changes. He let people tell their own stories, without interfering, without trying to control the narrative. Lucy was particularly eloquent. She told the story of how she had been fired when she needed the health plan the most, of how her daughter had asked the CEO for help, of how Robert had not only corrected the mistake, but transformed the entire company culture. "I was dying inside," Lucy told the camera, tears streaming unashamedly. "Not just physically because of my condition, but emotionally, because I had lost all hope that anyone cared. I thought that for people like me, people who clean floors and empty trash cans, there was no one who saw us as human beings. And then Mr. Miles showed me that there are still good people in this world, people willing to put other people before profit. He gave me back my life and hope for my daughter's future." Robert Allen also interviewed other employees. A software engineer talked about how the work environment had become more creative and collaborative, now that people weren't constantly afraid of being the next to be fired. A systems analyst revealed she had turned down a higher-paying offer from a competitor because she didn't want to leave TechGen, something unthinkable 6 months ago. Each testimony painted a picture of a company in transformation, not without its pains, but definitely heading towards something better. When the formal interview finally took place, Robert Allen got straight to the point. "Mr. Miles, your shareholders say you are sabotaging your own company. How do you respond to that?" Robert took a deep breath. "I respond that they are looking at the wrong numbers. Yes, our operating costs have increased significantly, but our productivity has also increased. Our turnover has dropped drastically. We are retaining talent that we would have lost before because they felt exploited and devalued. Our engineers are innovating at a pace we've never seen before because now they work for a company that actually cares about them." "But what about the quarterly profit?" Robert Allen insisted, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "Quarterly profit is important, of course, but it can't be the only metric of success. If your only concern is the next quarter, you will make short-sighted decisions that destroy the company in the Long run, I would rather have smaller but sustainable and growing profits over the next 10 years than huge profits today and a bankrupt company 5 years from now because we've burned out all our best employees. We've burned their souls, their creativity, their loyalty, and then we're surprised when they leave us or when they stop caring. Robert Allen paused, consulting his notes. I've researched your history, Mr. Miles. You built this company from scratch 12 years ago. Throughout that time, you had a reputation for being ruthless, even cruel in your business decisions. What changed? What made a man like you do such a dramatic turnaround? Robert smiled, a sad but genuine smile. A 6-year-old girl held my hand and told me she knew I was good. And I realized that I wasn't, but that I wanted to be. Sometimes all we need is someone to believe in us to give us the courage to change. And if the shareholders vote to remove you from the company, Robert looked directly at the camera, his voice firm and clear, then I will know that I chose to fight for what was right, even knowing I could lose everything. And I will sleep well at night because of it. Because for the first time in many years, I can look in the mirror and not feel ashamed of the man I see looking back. The article came out in the following week's issue and caused an immediate sensation. The magazine put Robert on the cover with the headline, "The CEO Who Chose People Over Profit, Genius or Madman." The article detailed all the changes he had implemented, including the story of Lucy and Isabella. It cited the increased productivity numbers. It featured testimonials from employees whose lives had been transformed. And it asked a provocative question. What if Robert Miles is right? What if the traditional model of short-term profit maximization is unsustainable? What if the real innovation isn't in technology, but in humanity? The response was immediate and overwhelming. The article went viral on social media. People shared it, saying they wanted to work for companies like TechGen. Business students began to cite Robert as an example of ethical leadership in their academic papers. University professors discussed the case in their classes. Online business forums fiercely debated whether Robert was a visionary or an idiot. But most importantly, international. Institutional investors began to call. Large investment funds that prioritized corporate social responsibility wanted to know more about TechGen. Some even expressed interest in buying shares, attracted not in spite of the humanitarian changes, but because of them. Michael arrived at Robert's office the morning after the publication with an expression that mixed shock and anger. "You planned this," he accused, throwing a copy of the magazine on the desk. "You knew the article would have this impact." "I hoped people would see the value in what we're doing," Robert corrected calmly, "but I didn't plan anything other than telling the truth. I planned to be honest about why I did what I did, and apparently that resonated with people." "The shareholders want to cancel the meeting," Michael said, his voice laced with frustration and something that might have been reluctant respect. "Our stock price has gone up 15% since yesterday. Investment funds are lining up to buy a stake in the company. Everyone is talking about how your humanized model is the future of business. You won, Robert. Against all odds, you actually won." "So it's settled," Robert said, but there was no triumph in his voice. Just weary relief. "No, it's not settled," Michael exploded, his composure finally breaking. "You got lucky, Robert. Pure luck. If that article hadn't gone viral, you'd be out right now. Your head would be on a platter. And you still want to continue with this madness? Can't you just accept the win and go back to being at least a little more conservative?" "It's not madness, Michael. It's the right way to do business. And yes, I want the meeting to happen." Michael looked at him as if he had gone completely insane. "Why? You've already won. The shareholders won't vote against you now that the market has validated your actions. You can just move on." "Exactly. I want them to vote in favor not because it's financially profitable now, but because it's the right thing to do, always. I want a real commitment to this philosophy, not just an opportunistic acceptance because it worked this one time. Because, Michael, there will be times when this approach isn't the most profitable in the short term. There will be bad quarters. There will be crises. And in those moments, I need to know that the company is committed to its values, not just its profits." "You're asking for a lot, Robert. You're asking people who have spent their entire lives worshipping the god of profit to suddenly convert to a new religion." I'm asking for the minimum, basic humanity, fundamental decency. And if that's asking too much, then maybe we as a society are in a much darker place than I imagined. The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday. The buzz in the company was palpable. Everyone knew what was at stake. The day before the meeting, when Robert arrived in the morning, he found a scene that left him speechless. The lobby was filled with employees, hundreds of them, all wearing T-shirts with the phrase "People First" printed on the front. It was a silent demonstration, organized by Lucy and other department leaders, showing support for the CEO who had chosen them over the cold numbers on a spreadsheet. As Robert walked past them, the employees began to applaud. It wasn't a loud or exaggerated applause. It was respectful, sincere, filled with genuine gratitude. There were tears in the eyes of many. Some held handmade signs with messages of thanks. An older woman from the cleaning department approached and simply held Robert's hand for a moment, saying nothing, but her eyes said everything. Lucy came forward and handed Robert a thick binder, so heavy he had to use both hands to hold it. Inside were hundreds of pages of reports and testimonials, data on increased productivity, on transformed lives, on families that now had security and hope. There were handwritten letters from employees telling their stories. There were photos of children smiling in the new daycare center. There were graphs showing the dramatic reduction in stress and burnout. There were even letters from clients saying they preferred to do business with TechGen because the company represented values they believed in. "This is our defense of you, sir," Lucy said with a smile that lit up her entire face. "Because you defended us when no one else would. You saw us when we were invisible. You valued us when we were disposable. And now we want everyone to see what that means." Robert took the binder, feeling an enormous weight of responsibility, but also something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could actually change something. Not just at TechGen, but in the corporate world as a whole. Maybe his story could inspire other CEOs to look at their own companies and see people instead of numbers. Maybe a little girl holding his hand could be the beginning of something much bigger than any of them could imagine. The morning of the meeting dawned overcast in New York City, but Robert woke up feeling strangely at peace. For the first time in years, he wasn't worried about numbers or results, or what the investors would think of him. He had done what he believed was right, and would now have to live with the consequences, whatever they were. As he got dressed, his gaze fell on Isabella's drawing, which he had framed and placed on his nightstand. Those simple stick figures holding hands, the naive but profound message. "Thank you for being really good." It was all that mattered now. He touched the glass of the frame with his fingertips, as if absorbing courage from that childlike image. Before leaving, Robert did something he had never done before. He knelt beside his bed, and though he was not a religious man, he said a silent prayer. He didn't ask for victory, he didn't ask for things to go his way. He only asked for the courage to accept the outcome, whatever it might be, and the wisdom to continue doing what was right, regardless of the consequences. When he stood up, there was a serenity on his face that hadn't been there before. When he arrived at TechGen, Robert found the press surrounding the building. The story had gained national and international traction. Journalists from all over the country and even some foreign outlets wanted to cover this meeting, which was being called a defining moment for modern capitalism. There were cameras from CNN, the BBC, Bloomberg, correspondents speaking English, Spanish, even Mandarin. It was an exaggeration, of course, but Robert understood the symbolism. In a world where profit was king, he was proposing something radical, that people mattered as much as numbers. And the world was watching to see if this proposal would be crushed or if it would flourish. In the lobby, Robert was intercepted by several journalists wanting a statement. He paused for a moment and said only, "Today is not about me. It's about all the people who work in this company and deserve to be seen, valued, and respected. You will see the rest in the meeting." His voice was calm but firm, and something in his tone made the journalists step back respectfully. The boardroom on the 23rd floor was packed. All the main shareholders were present, some in person, others by video conference. The huge screens on the walls showed the faces of investors from different parts of the world, all connected to witness this historic moment. Michael was sitting on the other side of the table, his expression carefully neutral. Robert noticed that his partner's hands were trembling slightly as he shuffled some papers, a sign of nervousness Michael rarely showed. There were also representatives from the international investment funds that had expressed interest in the company. One of them, a British man named James Worthington, represented a $5 billion fund specializing in sustainable investments. He watched everything with sharp eyes, occasionally taking notes on a tablet. Beside him was Catherine Chen, from a Chinese fund focused on corporate social responsibility, and Miguel Castellanos, from a Spanish group that had revolutionized the European market with humanized business practices. And in an unusual decision that Robert had insisted upon, there were employee representatives, including Lucy, who now held the position of Director of Human Resources after a meteoric promotion based on her extraordinary results. Beside her were John from Security, Marianne from Maintenance, and 3 other employees from different departments. Their presence there was revolutionary in itself, a recognition that those who made the company run deserved a voice in the decisions that affected their destinies. The chairman of the board, a 65-year-old man named Albert Foster, who had witnessed countless corporate battles in his decades of experience, opened the session with a light tap of his gavel. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to vote on the continuation of Mr. Robert Miles as CEO of TechGen. As you all know, there have been significant concerns about the decisions made in recent months, particularly regarding the drastic increase in operational costs. However, there have also been unexpected positive developments that need to be considered. This is no ordinary vote. What we decide here today may well define not only the future of TechGen, but serve as a precedent for the entire American corporate market. He paused, letting the weight of those words hang in the air. Before we proceed to the vote, I will give the floor to Mr. Miles for his final remarks. Mr. Miles, you have 15 minutes. Robert stood up, feeling all eyes on him. He had prepared a speech full of numbers and projections, graphs showing long-term return on investment, detailed analyses of how employee satisfaction translated into productivity. Francis had spent days helping him compile irrefutable data. He had solid economic arguments, case studies of other companies that had successfully adopted similar models. But when he opened his mouth, all those prepared words vanished. Instead, he spoke from the heart. 3 months ago, Robert began, his voice firm but filled with emotion, I was a different man. I saw this company as a machine. Numbers in, products out, profit generated. The people who made it all work were just replaceable parts in that machine. If a part broke or became too expensive, you just threw it away and put in a new one. It was efficient, it was rational, and it was completely, utterly wrong. He paused, looking around the room, meeting the eyes of each person present. It took a 6-year-old girl to show me that. Isabella, the daughter of an employee I had fired without even knowing her name. An employee who had worked here for 5 years with excellence, but to me was just a number on a cost-cutting spreadsheet. A girl who looked at me, a man who hadn't shown an ounce of humanity in years, and saw goodness where there was none. And then she asked me to help her mother. Something so simple, so pure, and I realized I had a choice. I could continue being the cold machine I had become, or I could try to be the good person that child believed I was. Lucy was crying silently in her seat, as were several other employees present. Even some of the shareholders seemed touched, though they tried to hide it. James Worthington was leaning forward, completely engrossed. I chose to change, Robert continued, his voice growing in intensity. And yes, that change cost money. A lot of money. Our operational costs increased by 300%. Our last quarter's profit plummeted. If you vote based solely on those numbers, I will understand completely. Numbers don't lie. But they also don't tell the whole story. They don't show John, our security guard, who was finally able to pay for his father's surgery. They don't show Marianne, who for the first time in 5 years gets to watch her children grow up because she no longer has to work 3 shifts to survive. They don't show the hundreds of employees who now come to work with hope instead of fear. He took a deep breath, feeling the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. But I ask you to consider other numbers too. Our employee turnover, which cost millions a year in training and lost productivity, is down 80%. Do you know how much money we save just by not having to constantly hire and train new employees? Our sick leave, which delayed projects and cost even more, has decreased by 60%. Healthy employees work better. It's simple math. Our innovation, measured in registered patents, has doubled. Doubled. Because engineers who aren't worried about being fired tomorrow have the mental space to create. Happy, healthy, and secure employees work better. It's simple math, but it's math that takes time to manifest. And I'm asking you to have the patience to let that math work. One of the shareholders, a woman named Patricia Drummond, an investor famous for her pragmatic and sometimes ruthless approach, raised her hand. Mr. Miles, with all due respect, we hear your logic, and it makes sense on paper. I'll even admit the productivity numbers are impressive, but the market is unpredictable. What happens if, 2 years from now, this humanized approach is no longer profitable? What happens if our competitors find ways to be more efficient while maintaining the traditional model? What happens if there's a recession and we need to cut costs drastically? Do we just continue to bleed money in the name of humanity while the company sinks? And it was there that Robert made the most important decision of his life. He could have said no, that if the approach ceased to be profitable, they would reverse the changes. He could have reassured the shareholders that profit would always be the ultimate priority. He could have given them the easy way out, the guarantee that at the end of the day he was still a pragmatic businessman. But he didn't. Instead, he looked directly at Patricia and said with a conviction that surprised even himself, "Yes." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Patricia blinked, confused. "Yes, what?" "Yes, we will. Continue to prioritize humanity, even if it ceases to be profitable in the short term. That is exactly the choice I am asking you to make today. I am not asking you to vote for me, because the current numbers are good, or because the media is on our side, or because international investment funds are interested. I'm asking you to vote for a real, lasting commitment to the idea that people matter as much as profits, always. Not just when it's convenient or financially advantageous, especially when it's not." Michael stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Robert, you are asking the shareholders to compromise the company's financial stability based on a philosophical ideal. You are asking them to choose principles over profits. That's business insanity. No company can survive like that." Robert turned to face his partner and best friend of so many years. "No, Michael, that's humanity. And if this meeting, if this company, cannot commit to that, then maybe I really shouldn't be here. Maybe you should find someone who can sleep soundly knowing their decisions destroy lives, because I can't anymore, and I don't want to be able to." The debate continued for over an hour. Some shareholders argued passionately that Robert was being irresponsible, that he had a fiduciary duty to them to maximize profits. Others defended his vision as exactly what the corporate world needed, a necessary revolution in a broken system. Frederick, the youngest director, gave an eloquent speech about how his generation no longer wanted to work for companies that had no values beyond profit. The representatives from the international funds revealed they had conducted deep analyses and believed Robert's model was not only ethically superior, but also financially viable in the long run. James Worthington presented data from European companies that had adopted similar approaches and were thriving. Catherine Chen spoke about how the Chinese market was increasingly valuing companies with social responsibility. Miguel Castellanos shared success stories from Spain that echoed what Robert was trying to do. Lucy, when given the floor, stood up with her legs trembling but her voice steady. She spoke with a passion that moved many in the room about how the changes had literally saved her life and the lives of dozens of other employees. "I was sick, hopeless, working just to survive another day, and then Mr. Miles gave me back my dignity. He gave me back my future. He gave me back the ability to be a mother without having to choose between feeding my daughter or treating myself. You can vote based on numbers, and I understand that. But remember that every number on a spreadsheet is a person, a life, a family. And when you choose numbers over people, you are not just affecting profits, You are deciding who lives with dignity and who lives in despair. When Lucy finished, there were tears in the eyes of many present. Even Patricia Drummond seemed shaken, discreetly dabbing her eyes with a tissue. John from security spoke briefly about how for the first time in 20 years of work, he felt valued. Marianne from maintenance shared how her children had drawn a picture of the new company daycare and how it was the first happy drawing they had ever made of something related to their mother's work. Finally, after all the discussions, after all the arguments and counter-arguments, Albert Foster raised his hand for silence. Gentlemen, the time has come to vote. This is no ordinary vote. Today we are not just voting on the tenure of a CEO. We are voting on what kind of company we want to be, what kind of world we want to create. Those in favor of Mr. Robert Miles remaining as CEO, with full support for his policies of corporate humanization and the commitment to uphold these values even in difficult times, please say aye. What happened next surprised even Robert. One by one, every shareholder present said aye. Some said it quietly, almost reluctantly, but they said it. Others said it with conviction, their voices strong and clear. James Worthington said aye and added that his fund would like to significantly increase its investment in TechGen. Catherine Chen said aye and commented that she was eager to present Robert's model at international conferences. Patricia Drummond, who had been one of the most skeptical, said aye after a long pause, adding, "I hope you're right, Robert, and I will do everything in my power to make sure you are." Michael was the last, and for a long moment it seemed he would vote against. He looked at Robert for what felt like an eternity. There were so many things in that look, years of partnership, battles won together, the founding of the company in a small garage, all the victories and defeats they had shared. And then Michael sighed deeply, a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "Aye," he said finally, though it seemed to physically pain him. "Aye, and may God help us all. But let the record show that if you're crazy, Robert, then I choose to be crazy with you, because maybe the world needs more madmen like you." The vote was unanimous. Robert would remain CEO. More than that, the meeting voted to incorporate into the company's bylaws a formal commitment to employee well-being as a corporate priority, not just as a side effect of the pursuit of profit. It was unprecedented, it was revolutionary, it was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Albert Foster brought down the gavel and declared, "Let it be recorded that on this day TechGen has chosen a different path, and may we all have the courage to follow it, no matter how difficult the journey." When the meeting ended and everyone began to leave, Michael approached Robert. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Then Michael extended his hand, but Robert pulled him into a hug. "I still think you're crazy," Michael muttered in Robert's ear, but there was a smile in his voice. "But maybe the world needs more madmen like you. Let's make this work, Robert, for real, together." Robert squeezed his partner's shoulder, feeling that they were finally back on the same side, stronger than ever. "Thank you for trusting me, Michael. I know it wasn't easy. I know I asked a lot of you." "You asked me to be human," Michael replied. "And that shouldn't be asking a lot. But somehow in this crazy world we live in, it is." In the months that followed, TechGen became a case study in business schools around the world. Professors from Harvard, Stanford, INSEAD, all the major institutions wanted to study the phenomenon. Robert's humanized model proved to be not only ethically superior, but also surprisingly profitable. Happy and secure employees were more productive, more creative, more loyal. The extremely low turnover saved millions in training costs. The company's positive reputation attracted the best talent on the market, willing to accept slightly lower salaries just to work in an environment that valued them as human beings and not as disposable resources. Customers, increasingly socially conscious, preferred to do business with companies that treated their employees with dignity. TechGen began to receive awards for Best Place to Work, Best Company and Social Responsibility, Best Innovative Management Model. But most importantly, other companies began to pay attention. Small startups adopted the model from the outset. Some large corporations began to experiment with similar pilot programs. Robert started receiving invitations to speak at conferences around the world, sharing his story of transformation. 6 months after the historic meeting, Robert was in his office when Francis announced he had visitors. Lucy entered, now with a completely different appearance. She had gained a healthy amount of weight, her dark circles had completely vanished, and there was a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her cleaning uniform had been replaced by an elegant suit appropriate for her new position as Director of HR. But what had changed the most was her posture. She walked with confidence, her head held high, like someone who finally knew her own worth. Beside her was Isabella, now 7 years old, bouncing with excitement. She had grown a bit, but her eyes still had that same light of innocence and kindness that had touched Robert's heart months ago. "Mr. Miles!" Isabella shouted, running up to him. "I made another drawing for you. This one is special." Robert smiled, that genuine smile he had rarely shown before, and that now came more easily, transforming his entire face. "I would love to see it, Isabella. Your drawings are always special to me." The girl held out the paper, and Robert opened it carefully, as if it were a precious treasure. This time the drawing was more elaborate, with more details and vibrant colors. It showed Robert in his office, but surrounded by dozens of happy people of all colors and sizes. There were children playing in the daycare. There were adults smiling at their jobs. There was even a bright sun with a smiling face in the corner. And at the top, written in Isabella's improved but still childlike handwriting, was the sentence that would make Robert keep that drawing for the rest of his life. "You learned that people are more important than money. My teacher said you are a real hero." Robert looked at those words for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened in the last few months. All the difficult choices, all the times he had to choose between the easy path and the right path, all the nights he wondered if he was doing the right thing, if he wasn't being naive, if he wasn't condemning the company to failure. And now, looking at that colorful, vibrant drawing, he knew with absolute certainty that he was. Every second of doubt had been worth it. Every dollar spent had been an investment in the kind of world he wanted to see. "You taught me this, Isabella," Robert said, kneeling to be at her height. "You and your mother. You showed me that being truly good is more important than being falsely successful. You reminded me of something I had forgotten, or perhaps never knew, that success without humanity is just a pretty way of describing failure." Isabella hugged him tightly, and Robert felt tears sting his eyes. He didn't try to hide them. He let them fall freely, tears of gratitude, of relief, of pure joy. When she pulled away, she was beaming. "You're my favorite hero," she said with absolute seriousness. "Better than the superheroes on TV because you're real." Lucy placed a hand on Robert's shoulder, and when he looked at her, he saw that she was crying too. "Thank you, Mr. Miles," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "for everything. For giving me my life back, for giving hope to so many other people, for proving that it's still possible to be successful while being good, for showing that profit and humanity don't have to be enemies, but can be allies. You didn't just change TechGen. You changed the way people think about work, about value, about what really matters in life." Robert stood up, holding the drawing carefully, as if it were the most valuable thing he owned. And in many ways it was. "Thank you both," he said sincerely, "for reminding me that I could be more than I was, that we can all be better than we think we are. Isabella, you asked me a question months ago. You asked me to help your mother because good people help other good people. And I realized I wasn't a good person. But I wanted to be. And you gave me the chance to try." Isabella tilted her head, thoughtful. "But you were always good," she said with the simple logic of children. "You just forgot. Sometimes people forget, but you remembered, and now you help everyone else remember too." That night, Robert placed the new drawing next to the old one on his nightstand. He had a special frame made for this one too, with a small plaque underneath with the date and the inscription, "The day I learned that success is measured in lives touched, not in profits accumulated." Those 2 pieces of paper, with their simple figures and profound messages, were worth more to him than all the stocks and profits and business, awards in the world, Because they represented something no spreadsheet could measure, the transformation of a man who had lost his humanity and then found it again in the honest eyes of a child. He picked up his phone and wrote a note to himself, something he wanted to always remember. The most important day of my life was not when TechGen was worth its first billion. It was the day a 6-year-old girl held my hand and believed in me. Profit can buy many things, but it cannot buy the feeling of knowing you made a difference in someone's life. It cannot buy the peace that comes from sleeping knowing your decisions have built, rather than destroyed. It cannot buy the simple joy of looking in the mirror and liking the person you see looking back. And as New York City glittered outside, with its millions of lives and stories and struggles and dreams, as the city that never sleeps continued its frantic dance of ambition and survival, Robert Miles could finally sleep in peace, knowing that he had chosen the right side of history, the side of people, the side of humanity, the side that, in the end, was the only one that truly mattered. Because companies come and go, fortunes are made and lost, buildings are built and demolished. But the way we treat people, the kindness we put into the world, the example we leave behind, that remains, that echoes, that matters. And maybe, just maybe, the story of Robert and Isabella could inspire others to make their own courageous choices, to see people instead of numbers, to remember that behind every employee there is a story, a family, dreams and fears and hopes, and that when we choose to see that humanity, when we choose to honor it, we are not just building better companies, we are building a better world,